Hello and welcome to Viewpoints. I'm Lauren Woolman. Today I'm joined by Nick Catrantzos, Security Manager from the Metropolitan Water District of Southern California, a recent graduate of the Master's Program here at the Center for Homeland Defense and Security, and the winner of his cohort's Outstanding Thesis Award. Nick, congratulations, welcome. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Lauren. It's a pleasure to be here.
This thesis is fascinating, and congratulations again on winning your class's award for the Outstanding Thesis. The title of the thesis is No Dark Corners, Defending Against Insider Threats to Critical Infrastructure. Tell us a little bit about the thesis.
Okay, well, I'm in the infrastructure business. I've been in the security business, or the protection business, as I like to think of it, for about 30 years. And currently I'm with a major utility. I've been worried about threats, as has everybody in the post 9/11 universe. As I start thinking about it, the threat to most institutions, as well as infrastructures, is not going to really come from the outside. Why? Because we can see it coming. We've learned how to defend against physical threats. We can anticipate them. The real threat is going to be from the inside. And so I wanted to focus on that. And I thought the best way to do this would be to take advantage of my being a bit long in the tooth by reaching out to different people who have been involved in other disciplines, such as espionage, workplace violence response, to see what insights they could deliver that I could perhaps turn into something usable to help defenders of critical infrastructure and any other institution when they're trying to deal with insiders. So I came up with this idea. I looked at it. As you predicted, in the course of any of these kinds of explorations, there were many surprises. I even found some things that were counterintuitive. And such as the idea that we can rely exclusively on corporate sentinels, the people like myself who are charged with the security function, whose primary role it is to help defend the organization against hostile forces. And the reality was, as I got into this exploration further and further, I found that that wasn't good enough, because what that does, people in my field tend to be specialists, and we tend to have a laser-like focus on hostile forces. But what we really need is to substitute that laser for a flashlight. We need a wider look. So I came up with No Dark Corners, because the idea behind that is what we need is total engagement and involvement at the team level. No Dark Corners is about constant vigilance, all hands on deck, mobilizing the entire workforce, the entire team, to defend against infiltrators, attackers, or insider threats.
Fascinating. You predicated No Dark Corners in part on two prevailing theories of security and infiltration. One of them is broken windows theory.
Right.
Tell us a little bit about that. And the other was?
Defensible space.
Defensible space. How did those figure into your research?
Well, they actually, I'd like to think they're the intellectual theoretical underpinnings of what interests me, and that is how does one mobilize a person who is a non-security individual to take a proprietary interest in defending his or her workspace. And the seminal work was by Oscar Newman, Defensible Space, in 1972. He was an architect who worked with the New York Housing Authority, where he had a number of statistics available, and he found that if you reconfigure the space in such a way that people exercise territoriality over it, all of a sudden crime goes down and becomes safe. And he did this looking at housing projects because there were lots of data there for him to mine. But he was concentrated primarily in residential environments. The whole purpose of this was to get legitimate users of an environment to exercise proprietary interest in it, control it, be territorial, and therefore chase away the illegitimate users. A follow-on to that, intellectually, if not directly, was fixing broken windows theory, originating from about 10 years after Newman's work from an essay by James Q. Wilson and George Kelling, whose observation was that if you take a warehouse and you break one window in it and the window is unmended, within a few days all the other windows will be broken, because the signal that it sends to the community is that nobody cares and nobody's watching. On the other hand, if you fix it promptly and you show attention to that area, the windows will not be broken, and you will have order maintenance activities exercising a restraining force on the criminal element and the nefarious activities that we all want to prevent.
Now, that theory was famously implemented in New York by Chief Bratton and then in Los Angeles, no?
In a number of different places. Kelling had some experiments that worked very well in Baltimore and in San Francisco and a number of other cities. And they went only so far. Then there were some problems with people who were essentially invoking civil libertarian concerns on behalf of people that were presumed to be disadvantaged, which were also the offender population that he was trying to defend against. My thought was both these theories are great, and they really apply largely to either residential environments or other public spaces. But in my universe, I'm looking at private spaces. When it comes to utilities and other institutions, certainly they have a number of components that are out there at large at the public, but a number of the critical assets are really private spaces. So what can we do to extend these kinds of theories and yet adapt them to a private space? And that's how I came up with No Dark Corners. The idea being that we've done some of these things before in the in Manhattan Project style days, and in the classified environment, for example, we have things like two-person integrity rules, where we no load zones in nuclear weapons areas, where we don't allow one person to go alone because that one person could have nefarious intent. And so we always insist in these government arenas that there are at least two people there. It inhibits the chance of one person to go astray. Well, I thought, what can we do to take that kind of a concept and apply it elsewhere? And that's where we came up with No Dark Corners, in working with a Delphi group of subject matter experts who were in the blind and did not know each other, and working through an iterative series of questions. I started probing and asking what could they do and what are the traditional defenses that we can use. And all of them at first were unsurprisingly somewhat unspectacular. Random audits would work well, and more security controls work well. When I got to the final round of Delphi questions, that's where it got exciting, because now we reversed the process. Now we said, you practitioners who've been in the business for at least 20 years, some as long as 30 or 40 years.
How would you attack?
How would you attack, exactly. And the surprises were that, first of all the things that they thought were traditionally good measures and said amen to, they said, I can defeat this fairly easily. These are absolutely no impediment. And then we started looking and saying, well, what could you really do now that you've thought about how you can attack an infrastructure, a critical infrastructure? How would you defend it? And then they started coming up with interesting ideas, which are more leaning towards managerial thought than traditional security thought. And one of them was, we need to have more oversight and more engagement on the level of the people who work directly with the protected asset. And those are not going to be security people. They're not going to be people who are running sniffer programs through computer software to look at what kind of keystroke somebody is making. They're not going to be the usual sentinels, auditors, internal auditors. They're going to be the people who are right there working alongside the would-be infiltrator or perpetrator of nefarious acts. And so what they need to do is to figure out a way to watch this person and let this person know that he or she is being watched without it being oppressive. The other side of this coin, the challenge and the balancing act, is you don't want to have a big brother environment. You don't want to have somebody taking over and creating such an oppressive environment that the individual, like yourself, is no longer able to function because you feel you're being watched all the time. The metaphor I came up with to describe where we want to go, the targeted place to be, is a co-pilot. A co-pilot has, if you and I are flying a plane and you're the co-pilot, you have no authority over me. You can't command me to do something. But I'm darn glad you're there, because if something goes wrong if I got a bad burrito in the in-flight meal and start keeling over, you can wrest the controls from my hands, and I don't mind. And we are partners. So we talk about we share in doing the instrument readings and in the tasks of flying. And that's what we need. We need a co-pilot level of engagement at the work team level to not only deter nefarious activity, but actually to result in improvements in the performance of our duties.
This sounds like an organizational dynamic or cultural paradigm that has applications throughout the Homeland Security community and perhaps beyond Homeland Security.
I hope so, and I think it might. One of the things I found in my exploration was something good to say about Homeland Security. There are so many people who are ready and rapid critics of various Homeland Security protocols and programs. I found one that looked like it was encouraging. The ICE image program, which what's discouraging is the combination of acronyms. ICE stands for Immigration and Customs Enforcement, and image, the I from image, stands for ICE. And then we go with MAGE, which is Mutual Agreement Between Government and Employers. It's a cumbersome name, but it's a useful concept. And it's actually a very good way to vet people who are coming into an organization and to help train the people who are doing the background checks. Because what we find, anyone who's done background checks for a living, as I have, as a licensed investigator and as a former corporate security manager, oftentimes the function and the task defaults to the lowest level clerk in the organization, whose only interest is in getting the person through the door and in speeding the process. But with something like the ICE image program, people get trained on how to do this job better, what to look for, and how to look for anomalies and bring them to someone's attention. Things like that can help us greatly, because that might be our first line of defense against potential infiltrators. And what I found in my research on this particular activity in this thesis was that we're actually more susceptible to infiltration than we are to the disgruntled insider who decides one day he or she has had enough and they're going to take the institution down with them. That just doesn't happen as much, and we're not as vulnerable to that, especially in critical infrastructures. Because this kind of person is also maybe dangerous, but is also somewhat difficult to control and is unlikely to be an agent of a terrorist organization that's plotting an act of sabotage, for example.
So the main findings, lessons learned, applications of this thesis have to do with a sense of partnership, ownership, buy-in on the part of those critical personnel, the ones closest to the protected assets, and all the way up through the organization.
Absolutely. Transparency, no dark corners, constant vigilance, active engagements of the people there, all hands on deck.
Infiltration, a larger threat than we imagined.
Exactly.
The use of analytical red teaming for security experts and management perhaps to look at protection, asset protection from the perspective of the infiltrator as a fruitful way of exposing vulnerabilities.
It can be, it certainly, and it also offers some surprises, which is what I was pleased to find in this exploration. But it's also something that you predicted early on in the thesis process.
Any last findings, lessons, things you hope will be useful about your thesis, your research?
Again, I think the main point, an important takeaway for me was that really the worst threat is not going to be from the outside, because we've learned to defend against it and we've learned to anticipate it. It's from the insider. It's something that security professionals, cops on the street, others have learned by looking at how they can mobilize. If they can mobilize a neighborhood watch, it will provide great protective value. And this is similarly an extension of that kind of theory. If you can involve people at the level who are closest to the asset in their own protection and engage them consistently over time, I think you'll be able to prevent the vast majority of negative consequences that we all fear.
Nick, thank you for your service. Congratulations on your achievement. Thank you for joining us today, and good luck to you.
Thank you, Lauren. It's been my pleasure.